Yara Shahidi, welcome to Pod Save America. So great to have you here in
Happy
studio.
To be here.
Yeah. You are the star of 2 TV shows, Blackish and Grownish. You're going to Harvard in the fall. You recently founded 18 by 18, which is an organization dedicated to registering and educating first-time voters. You're busy.
A little bit.
Tell us about Grownish and Blackish.
Well, it's been fun. I mean, Blackish, we've been on for going on 5 years now.
Yeah.
Signed on when I was 13, and now I'm a legal adult and such, so that's cool. And then Grownish was just the natural next step to Blackish. I didn't know whether my character was just going to disappear and like they just weren't going to address like where she went, but instead we have a show to address it, so that was a nice surprise.
Did you always want to act?
I wanted to be a history professor for the longest time. Still pretty dead set on that too.
Okay.
I remember for my 10th birthday, we had like a dress up as what you want to be in the future, and I dressed up as a historian. So
what does a historian dress like?
It was a pinstripe suit
Okay.
and a pocket watch.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
How did you go from historian to actor then?
Well, my bubba is a DP and my mama is a commercial actress, and so we started with her, and it was always just a fun hobby. You get to work with your family, you work for a couple hours on set. It wasn't really intense, and then I think creatively it was just really interesting. And we never watched much TV, but always loved books, and so it was like another form of storytelling, and so it was a nice little happy accident that it all worked out, and it's been pretty cool ever since.
Yeah.
Do you ever call your agent and say, I only want to do stuff with Kenya Barris from now on?
I'm pretty sure we've had that conversation. Okay. I also remember, I'm not saying this just because I'm here, but I remember I'm with CAA, and I was like, so I really only want to do podcasts. They're
Great. Good
okay.
strategy.
Would have loved to known that as we started this friendship relationship off. But yeah.
And Crooked Media's own Kara Brown.
She's a writer.
On Grownish as well.
She's incredible.
So funny.
Very, very funny.
Can you tell us about 18 by 18? Why'd you start it? What are you guys hoping to do?
Well, I mean, the idea started post-election, election day, I was 16. I escorted my parents to the polls, but couldn't vote myself. And so the idea really came from 2 things. One, how as a person who is not yet able to vote, how are we supposed to be engaged with our government, and how are we supposed to understand it? And more than a theoretical, I've taken my AP American history class,
right.
In a way in which we understand what's happening, what policies are on the table when we're discussing politics, what does it all mean, and how do we participate? And then on the other level of being a first-time voter this year during midterms aren't really something that's addressed very often, especially for younger voters, especially on its prevalence and relevance. And so to be able to have a campaign that's really marketing politics to my generation in a way that you're no longer the anomaly for wanting to be engaged, but rather making it a given and really getting rid of the knowledge disparity in terms of information and how it's disseminated. And so that was the main inspiration for it. And then then the very practical side of also wanting to register young voters.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what's so cool about what you're doing. It's like you're not just out there tweeting about Trump or like DMing Kanye and then he tweets it or whatever is happening these days. You're talking about the midterms, about redistricting, like those ramifications. Like, what's your pitch to your freshman roommate at Harvard? That's, by the way, you're like, it's like, why would I vote?
Right. Well, I first have to start with the fact that whenever I say happy birthday to somebody, it usually stems from you can vote in 2 years.
Perfect.
Or like you can vote in a year. You can register to vote this year.
But you had a voting themed birthday party.
Yeah, I actually had friends register to vote at my birthday party. It was really exciting, and I registered.
That is
as well.
Commitment right there.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Committed. But I think if anything, it's oftentimes we discuss policies as though they don't affect real humans and as though they don't affect us. And so given that we are 18 and we may not be thinking long term that when these policies are in effect, they will affect us as young adults, they will affect our families, they'll affect our future. But more than that, being from a socially engaged generation that is known for rallying and phone banks and all of that, it's really more so voting is about taking our passions and what we've clearly stated our social and moral compass is and putting it into policy change and taking the next step and saying, we've already told you this is how we feel, and now you have to listen.
What got you interested in politics? How long have you been interested in politics?
Well, I'm a history nerd, and so I think it's really just for the love of history.
Okay.
I have a very socially engaged family in both Iran and in Wisconsin and Chicago. And so coming from a family that's always been engaged, coming from a grandfather who is an educator and a great-grandfather who got his master's behind a curtain to teach special ed, I feel like there's a certain, a certain respect due to just our role in history and the role that we can play in shaping our own future rather than this feeling of helplessness of it'll be however it'll be. And so I think that was the first step. And I think also I had the perfect timing of I took an American history class and a stats class during this election cycle, in which case I also realized my own lack of knowledge about what I was learning, about looking at a poll and coming from a stats perspective. Everything just kind of shifted. And so there's more of a need to be engaged. And I feel like being that I've lived most of my young adult years under like the utopic Obama administration, I feel like I was always interested in politics, but it didn't feel life-threatening or ending. And then you have this administration in which, well, the countries you're banning, my family's from one of those countries.
Right. I mean, you're half Iranian. President Trump's Muslim ban affected you in a very direct way. You wrote this beautiful post, I think on Instagram, about the dangers of xenophobia. Can you talk about that? Like, why'd you decide to write that? What did, what he tried to do mean to you?
Well, I mean, on a selfish level, it was really personal to wake up and see the list and see that I know people, that I know family. I know family from Iran. I know family that are Iranian that are in D.C. And so, like, I'm first-generation American on one side of my family, and so understanding the importance of immigration in my life means that it was something personal and something that I wanted to address. And more than that, I feel like being able to have the platform to address it in a way that I'm not necessarily telling anyone this is what you should do or how you should feel, but these are my feelings, being that it's directly impacted my life. And fortunately, I had no family that was stuck in airports or denied visas with the timing of it, but still knowing people that are stuck in airports is a drastic, crazy feeling. So any way I can use my platform to address an issue and to make it more humane and stop acting like the people that we're talking about aren't actually being affected.
Right. Well, and that's like a bigger problem with the U.S. and any conversation about Iran. It's like nuclear program, religious leaders. There's no conversation that's about Iranian people, culture, food, like things that we have in common. Any ideas for how do we fix that? Like, does everyone go to a really big Nowruz party? Like, what's the next move here?
That'd be great. I went to the last Nowruz celebration at the White House.
At the White House?
Oh, yes.
My entire family was there. My littlest brother, Ehsan, actually was eating all of the food because they had the best Iranian chef ever there. The White House smelled fantastic.
Have you made Fariel Govashiri present?
Yeah, all of it. But I have to say, I mean, media is a big role in which, like, how do we talk about or normalize, and more than normalize, celebrate the day-to-day life of people from all backgrounds. And that's why I feel like television has been such a perfect alignment, because it is about saying that these are people's stories, and even if they don't necessarily parallel your own, you can still relate to the humanity behind it. And, more than that, I feel like, again, it goes back to history and education, in which, because I've had such an alternative curriculum from which I've learned from, that has been more inclusive, I think I look at things within the context of, well, this is my knowledge base, and so this is why I feel a certain way about an immigration ban, or this is why I feel a certain way when Macron and Trump are talking about the Iran nuclear deal. Like, this instability didn't come from the redrawing of borders, or whatever it may be. And so the history has definitely helped, because being somebody who took every AP class available, it's non-inclusive in terms of the history that you learn. And so how are you expected to sympathize or empathize with somebody where you feel as though none of their journey had anything to do or impact your own? It is a very separatist, isolationist view.
Yeah. So 18 by 18 is a nonpartisan organization. You said you're a Democrat.
Yes.
There was a poll out today that said voters ages 18 to 34 support Democrats by 9 points less than they did 2 years ago, even as those young people overwhelmingly disapprove of Donald Trump. What do you think the Democratic Party needs to do better to sort of reach out to young voters and make sure that young voters aren't just active, but active in politics and align behind a certain set of issues and beliefs?
I mean, I guess a part of it it's a hefty question, but part of it would just have to be in engaging us.
Yeah.
I think even as somebody who was involved in the Clinton campaign loosely towards the end of it, there's just a lack of youth engagement in a way that felt natural, in a way that rather than having us fit into these are the standards or criteria of the Democratic Party, fitting the Democratic Party to us or relating it to our life, because I think there are already going to be so many natural correlations, but so many times those correlations aren't drawn for us. And so I feel like, again, it also goes to being aware of how voting works and being aware of, like, okay, vote for a third-party candidate, but understand how your votes are distributed.
Right.
And understand, like, let's think about the greater good. And let's think about, you're never going to find somebody that you completely align with, but what are the morals, or what is the line that we draw between this is a candidate I support and this is a candidate I can't support?
When you talk to other young people your age, what is the biggest challenge that stands in the way of them getting actually involved?
Well, it's really knowledge and self-recognition of your own possibility. I feel like I come from a generation that already wants to be engaged, a generation that, whether it's through social media, whether it's just through this idea that we have extreme access, we know a lot and we are aware of a lot, and we've led many movements, and we've seen the reemergence of student-led movements, especially in the past month. And so it's not a lack of interest, for sure. I feel like it's just a lack of recognizing the fact that we do have power, and whether it is buying power and looking at, like, when we boycott a brand, that means something. And so being aware of our own power, being aware of, okay, even if you aren't of voting age, this is the power that you do have. I have friends that campaign for local elected officials that they like, but those kind of things aren't often discussed in schools. You don't see a little, like, poster board up, like, and if you want a campaign, just call here.
Right. Do you think Parkland and the response from those students has changed people's perception of their own power and their own possibilities?
Definitely. I feel like the past month and a half in particular has been really poignant, because it's really discussed or really brought out the intersectionality in all of the issues that we're facing, because not only did we have the atrocity of Parkland, but we also had Stephon Clark being shot in his backyard holding a cell phone. And so when we talk about gun violence, now it's impossible to separate from not only these kids who are affected, but our communities of color, our communities in general. And so because of that, and also because of the stance that not only the students that are leading these Black Lives Matter movements, but also the Parkland March for Our Lives movements have done, it really becomes, you can't separate the faces and the people affected from the issue itself.
Yeah.
You think you'd ever run for office?
I want to be policy adjacent.
Policy adjacent?
Yeah.
I like that term.
I'm still figuring out what I necessarily mean by that, but I think I want to be next to Capitol Hill, just not on it.
Look, we feel
We'll let you get through college.
We moved from Washington because you don't want to live there.
Yeah.
But fighting for the stuff you believe in, you can do it from anywhere now. That's the best part.
Yeah. It's really cool.
Even here. All this.
Yara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
this
for
has been so
having
fun.
me.
We appreciate you stopping by.